17 years old. The world stretched out before her. A life waiting to be lived. Dreams taking shape. Plans unfolding. She had friends. She had a passion. She captured the world through the lens of her camera, freezing moments in time, turning them into something beautiful. To most, she was just another teenager, navigating the ups and downs of growing up, finding her place, looking ahead. But then, one day, she was gone. No goodbyes. No trace. Just silence. A disappearance that made no sense. A family that spoke in riddles. A mother who didn't seem to be searching. A father who carried on as if nothing had changed. While her friends asked questions, while the world around them grew suspicious, inside those walls, behind closed doors, the story being told was one of misdirection, of deception, of cover-ups. They said she ran away. They said she was out there, living her life, choosing not to come home. But the words didn't match the facts. The days passed. Then the weeks. Then the months. And still, no sign of her. Just a string of messages sent from her phone. A digital echo of her existence. But who was really typing them? Then, the police came knocking. And the story began to crumble. Lies began to unravel. The past surfaced in fragments, words scrawled in a diary, whispers of secrets long buried. A truth so horrifying that those closest to her had done everything to keep it hidden. This is not just a case of a missing girl. This is something else. Something far worse. A betrayal so deep it defies comprehension. A crime so cold it shakes the soul. A child who turned to those meant to protect her, only to find herself silenced forever. This is the story of Bernadette Walker. If you want to hear more cases like this, stories that expose the truth behind the shadows, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Because some stories should never be forgotten. Bernadette Walker was 17 years old. A photography student from Peterborough, England. A girl with ambition, creativity, a future waiting to unfold. She was like any other teenager, finding her place in the world, forming friendships, expressing herself through her art. She had a passion for capturing life through her camera lens, freezing time in a way only she could see. But beyond the snapshots and the social media posts, behind the everyday moments that seemed so ordinary, something else was happening. Something no one saw until it was too late. On July 18, 2020, Bernadette vanished. No warnings. No dramatic exits. One day she was there, and the next, she was gone. Her last known sighting was with the man who was supposed to bring her home, Scott Walker, the man she called Dad. He had picked her up from her grandparents' house. A simple, routine drive. A short distance. A trip that should have ended with her walking through the front door. But she never made it home. And no one outside her immediate family saw her again. At first, there was silence. Then, a narrative took shape. The family told the world that Bernadette had run away. That she had packed a bag, disappeared into the night, and chosen to cut ties. They sent messages from her phone, pretending to be her. They crafted replies, tried to make it seem like she was out there, living her life, choosing not to come back. For weeks, they kept up the illusion, keeping the outside world at bay. But beneath the surface, the truth was slipping through the cracks. Bernadette hadn't run away. She hadn't packed a bag, hadn't made plans for a new life. She was silenced before she ever had the chance. Days before she vanished, she had confided in her mother. Told her the truth. That she had been suffering in silence for years. That Scott Walker had stolen her childhood, had hurt her in ways no one should ever endure. She had finally spoken the words out loud, placed her trust in the woman who was supposed to protect her. But instead of safety, she found something else. Disbelief. Denial. And then, the unthinkable. Because after that conversation, after those secrets were laid bare, Bernadette wasn't seen again. This was not just a missing persons case. This was something deeper. A crime entangled in betrayal, in lies, in the very people who should have done everything to save her. The ones who should have been searching, the ones who should have been pleading for her safe return, were the very ones making sure she was never found. For weeks, the deception continued. Scott and Bernadette's mother worked together, spinning a story to keep the truth hidden. They controlled the narrative. They told the world what they wanted it to believe. But the walls were closing in. Because the truth doesn't stay buried forever. And when it finally began to surface, what it revealed was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Bernadette Walker was not just another name on a missing persons report. She was a 17-year-old girl with dreams, with a future she was just beginning to shape. Photography wasn't just a hobby to her, it was how she made sense of the world. She saw beauty in the smallest details, capturing the moments others might overlook. She was always taking pictures, always framing the world through her lens, seeing things differently than most. Maybe that was her way of escaping, of finding something brighter beyond what she was living. She had friends. She had plans. She was the kind of girl who laughed easily, who filled journals with sketches and notes about the life she wanted to build. But there was another side to her world, one she didn't always talk about. A weight she carried alone. Because behind closed doors, her home wasn't a place of comfort. It was something else entirely. Scott Walker had been in her life since she was a toddler. The man she called Dad. But he was never really a father. He was the one who dictated the rules, the one who kept control, the one who made sure everything revolved around him. To the outside world, he was just another working man, someone who lived an ordinary life, raising kids, going through the motions. But behind that thin mask of normalcy, he was something else. Someone who thrived on control, who made sure his secrets stayed buried, who knew exactly how to twist reality to his advantage. Bernadette knew what he was. She had known for years. But saying it out loud, that was different. She had carried it in silence for so long, keeping the truth locked away. Maybe she was afraid no one would believe her. Maybe she was afraid of what would happen if she spoke. But then, finally, she did. She told her mother. And everything changed. She expected protection. She expected the one person who should have fought for her to stand by her side. But that's not what happened. Her mother was the one person she should have been able to trust above all else. But trust meant nothing in that house. She wasn't a mother in the way a mother should be. There was no warmth, no sense of safety. Maybe there had been, once. Maybe before Scott, before things shifted, before she lost herself in him. But by the time Bernadette told her the truth, any part of her that might have once been a mother was gone. Instead of helping her daughter, she turned away. She made a choice. And that choice was to stand beside Scott, not Bernadette. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something worse. Maybe she had spent so long under his control that she didn't know how to exist outside of it. But the moment she sided with him, the moment she refused to see the truth in her own daughter's eyes, she sealed Bernadette's fate. And just like that, Bernadette was gone. Her friends waited for answers. The people who knew her, the ones who had seen her just days before, started asking questions. But the family stuck to their story. She had run away. That's what they told everyone. That's what they wanted the world to believe. But the police weren't so easily convinced. The Cambridgeshire Constabulary took the case. At first, it was a missing persons investigation, but from the beginning, there were gaps in the story. The timeline was shaky. The explanations didn't add up. And then there were the messages, texts sent from Bernadette's phone long after she had vanished. Texts that felt off. The wording. The tone. It wasn't right. It wasn't her. And then, the breaking point. The family was questioned. First separately, then together. And cracks started to show. The lies began to tangle. The more investigators pushed, the more inconsistencies surfaced. And eventually, one thing became clear. Bernadette Walker had never run away. She had never packed a bag. She had never left on her own. She had never even been given a choice. Bernadette had carried the weight of her truth in silence for years. The kind of silence that eats away at a person, that forces them to live in fear, to question whether anyone would ever believe them if they spoke. But she had reached a breaking point. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She had to say the words out loud. And so she did. She told her mother everything. She told her how Scott Walker had stolen her childhood, how the man she had called Dad was not the protector he was supposed to be, but the monster she feared the most. She described the years of abuse, the way he had controlled her, trapped her in a world where she had no voice, no way out. She told her mother the truth and waited for the reaction every child should be able to expect. Protection. Comfort. Safety. But that's not what she got. Her mother didn't believe her. Or maybe she did and just refused to face it. Maybe the truth was too inconvenient, too disruptive to the life she had built with Scott. Whatever the reason, her response was clear: she would not stand by Bernadette's side. She chose to ignore the cries of her own daughter. She chose to protect the man accused of unspeakable things. And from that moment on, Bernadette's fate was sealed. Just 2 days after revealing everything, Bernadette was gone. On the morning of July 18, 2020, Scott Walker was sent to pick her up from her grandparents' house. She had spent the night there, away from home, after the argument with her mother. Maybe she thought that time apart would change things. Maybe she still hoped her mother would come around, would finally choose her. Scott arrived. Bernadette got into the car. She was supposed to be going home. But she never made it. That car ride was the last time anyone outside of her family saw her. From that point on, there was only silence. No phone calls. No texts to her friends. No posts on social media. Bernadette Walker, a girl who had once captured life through her camera lens, had disappeared without a trace. But her family didn't act like a family in crisis. There were no frantic calls to the police. No desperate pleas for help. No immediate search for a missing daughter. Instead, there was a quiet, deliberate effort to control the story before anyone started asking questions. For over a month, they told the world that Bernadette had run away. They claimed she had left on her own, that she was out there somewhere, choosing not to come home. They sent text messages from her phone, pretending to be her, fabricating conversations to make it seem like she was still alive, still in control of her own disappearance. But their performance was flawed. The messages lacked emotion. They were robotic, vague. They didn't sound like a teenage girl navigating the world alone. They sounded like someone trying to buy time, trying to delay the inevitable. And then, 39 days after Bernadette was last seen, her mother finally reported her missing. By then, the police weren't just dealing with a missing persons case. They were dealing with something far darker. The delay, the suspicious behavior, the strange inconsistencies, it all pointed to a cover-up. Investigators started digging. They pulled phone records, traced movements, analyzed every interaction in the days before and after Bernadette's disappearance. And what they found shattered the illusion that Scott and her mother had tried so desperately to maintain. Because while they had been telling the world that Bernadette had run away, Scott had been making secret trips to remote locations, his phone switching on and off, disappearing from tracking systems. While they had been crafting fake messages, he had been disposing of evidence. While they had been playing the role of concerned parents, the truth was staring them in the face. Bernadette Walker had never run away. She had been taken. And those responsible were the very people who should have been fighting to bring her home. The investigation into Bernadette Walker's disappearance had never felt like a standard missing persons case. From the beginning, things didn't add up. The delay in reporting. The lack of urgency from her family. The forced, unconvincing messages that supposedly came from her. It all pointed to something carefully constructed, something meant to distract, to push people in the wrong direction. Detectives started with her phone records. Bernadette's phone had gone silent just hours after she got into the car with Scott Walker. No activity. No outgoing calls. No real evidence that she was making her own choices. But her social media accounts told a different story, one that didn't make sense. For weeks after she vanished, messages were still being sent from her phone. Short, vague messages. Updates that felt distant, off. A teenager who had been active online, who had shared pieces of her life freely, suddenly reduced to one-word replies and robotic texts. Investigators examined those messages closely. The wording. The grammar. The phrasing. And soon, it became clear, Bernadette hadn't sent them. Someone else had. Scott Walker and Sarah Walker had kept up the illusion for as long as they could. They had responded to friends, posted on her accounts, done just enough to make it seem like she was still out there, making her own choices. But the technology betrayed them. Phone pings placed Scott in remote locations at strange hours. Searches on his devices painted a damning picture. They hadn't just erased Bernadette. They had gone to great lengths to make sure no one would come looking for her. But secrets like these don't stay hidden forever. It was inside a lock-up garage that one of the most crucial pieces of evidence was found, Bernadette's diary. A diary filled with her thoughts, her fears, her truth. In those pages, she had written down everything. She had documented the abuse. She had put into words what Scott Walker had done to her, how she had suffered in silence for years. And she had written something else. Something that made the betrayal even harder to comprehend. She had written about her mother. She had written about the moment she finally told her. About the disbelief. About the threats. About how the one person who was supposed to protect her had turned her back instead. The diary was undeniable. It was Bernadette's voice, trapped in ink, speaking from beyond the grave. And it told a story no amount of lies could erase. With mounting evidence, police moved quickly. Scott Walker was arrested first. Then Sarah. They were charged. Questioned. And the layers of deception started to fall apart. Scott claimed innocence, but his actions spoke louder. Phone records placed him at suspicious locations in the hours and days after Bernadette disappeared. He had turned his phone off at crucial times, making sure he couldn't be traced. But investigators were able to piece together enough to paint a timeline, one that left no room for doubt. Sarah Walker's role was just as disturbing. She had helped weave the lie. She had played the part of the concerned mother in public while, behind the scenes, she was orchestrating cover-ups, pushing a false narrative, working alongside the very man her daughter had accused. When the case went to trial, the truth was laid bare. The jury listened to the diary entries, the phone evidence, the testimonies of investigators who had spent months unraveling the deception. They saw through the performances, the crocodile tears, the desperate attempts to shift blame. And when the verdict came, it was clear, justice had finally caught up with them. The trial was the moment of reckoning, the place where the years of deceit, the cold calculation, the cruel indifference would finally be confronted. It was here that Scott Walker would have to face the truth of what he had done, and Sarah Walker would be forced to answer for the role she had played in the cover-up. No more lies. No more carefully constructed stories. No more pretending. In the courtroom, the evidence spoke louder than any defense they could muster. The diary, the phone records, the messages sent from Bernadette's phone after she was already gone, each piece stripped away the illusion they had tried to maintain. The prosecution laid it all out, showing how Scott had taken Bernadette that morning and silenced her forever, how Sarah had chosen to protect a man accused of harming her daughter instead of protecting the child who had trusted her with the truth. Scott Walker denied everything. He sat there, emotionless, maintaining the lie to the very end. He claimed Bernadette had run away, that he had nothing to do with whatever had happened to her. But the facts crushed every desperate attempt to escape responsibility. The jury saw through him. They saw through Sarah. They saw the truth that Bernadette had never had the chance to tell in person. When the verdict was read, it was final. Scott Walker, guilty of murder. Guilty of perverting the course of justice. Sarah Walker, guilty of perverting the course of justice. For the first time since Bernadette had disappeared, there was something close to justice. But justice in this case was incomplete, because there was still one question left unanswered, the question that no one, not even the courts, had the power to force Scott to answer. Where was Bernadette? Even as he was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 32 years before he would even be considered for release, Scott Walker refused to give that answer. He listened as the judge told him he was a liar, a manipulator, a man who had shown no remorse for what he had done. He listened as the weight of his actions came crashing down on him. And still, he said nothing. Sarah Walker was sentenced to 6 years for her part in the deception, for the months she had spent pretending, lying to authorities, covering for the man she had chosen over her own daughter. 6 years for a betrayal that could never be undone. But there was no real victory in that courtroom, no relief that could come from a guilty verdict alone. Because Bernadette was still out there, somewhere. And the only person who knew where had chosen to take that knowledge to his grave. In December 2023, Scott Walker died in prison, never having revealed where he had hidden her body. Never allowing her family, her friends, the people who truly loved her, the chance to say goodbye. Even in death, he held on to his last cruel act of control. Bernadette Walker never got to live the life she had dreamed of. She never got to escape the nightmare she had been trapped in for years. And the people responsible for that made sure the pain of her disappearance would linger long after their own lives had unraveled. A guilty verdict could never undo what had been done. A sentence could never bring Bernadette home. And in the end, the truth, the full truth, was buried with the very man who had stolen her future. Bernadette Walker's story did not end in a courtroom. The guilty verdicts, the sentences, the headlines, they didn't close the wounds left behind. They didn't bring peace to the people who had truly cared about her. And they didn't erase the reality that, even after everything, her body was still missing, her final resting place still a secret kept by the very man who had taken her life. For her friends, the pain never faded. The girl they had laughed with, shared memories with, planned futures with, she was gone. Not missing. Not out there somewhere waiting to be found. Just gone. And the worst part was that they had spent weeks, months, hoping for a different outcome, holding on to the possibility that she would walk through the door, that the news reports were wrong, that somehow this was all just a horrible misunderstanding. When the truth came out, it shattered whatever small hope had been left. For her grandparents, her extended family, the people who had known her outside of the walls of the home that had become her prison, the betrayal ran even deeper. They had trusted Scott Walker. They had believed that Sarah Walker, a mother, would do what mothers are supposed to do, protect their child at any cost. And instead, they had watched as she became part of the very thing Bernadette had feared the most. Instead of standing beside her daughter, she had helped cover the tracks, helped spread the lies, helped make sure Bernadette was silenced in every possible way. The community of Peterborough was left with a wound that could never fully heal. A small town where people knew each other, where disappearances didn't happen like this, where stories like these belonged in far-off places, in crime documentaries, in the kind of cases that seemed unreal. But it had happened there. It had happened to a girl who should have had her whole life ahead of her. And the knowledge of that lingered, changing the way people looked at the world around them, making them question the faces they had once trusted. There was no comfort in the outcome. No way to truly move on from something that felt so unfinished. Because in the end, justice hadn't brought Bernadette home. Her story became a reminder of something that too many people already knew, a reminder that when victims of abuse speak out, they are too often met with disbelief. That too many people turn away, assume they're exaggerating, refuse to hear the truth because it's easier not to. Bernadette had spoken up. She had found the courage to say what had been happening to her. She had put it in writing, in her own words, in a diary that no one could erase. And yet, the one person who should have fought for her had turned against her instead. How many times had this happened before? How many others had been silenced, had been told to keep quiet, had been left to suffer alone because the people around them refused to listen? How many more times would it happen again? It's an uncomfortable question, but one that can't be ignored. What would have happened if someone had believed Bernadette sooner? If her words had been taken seriously the moment she spoke them? Would she still be here today? Would she have had the chance to break free, to start over, to live the life she had imagined for herself? There are too many stories like hers. Too many names that become headlines, too many faces that are only remembered after it's too late. But maybe, just maybe, if enough people start paying attention, start listening, start believing, maybe there won't have to be as many. What do you think needs to change? How do we make sure that when someone finds the courage to speak up, they aren't met with silence? How do we make sure that justice isn't something that only comes when it's too late? Bernadette Walker's story is one that lingers, one that leaves behind too many unanswered questions and a sense of unease that never quite goes away. It's a reminder of how deep betrayal can run, how the people closest to us are sometimes the ones we should fear the most, and how justice, even when served, doesn't always bring closure. It forces us to look at the world differently, to wonder how many other voices have been ignored, how many other stories have been erased before they could even be told. Cases like this are not just about what happened, they're about what could have been prevented. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the warnings are there, sometimes the cries for help are loud enough, and yet they still go unheard. Bernadette did everything she could to take back control of her life. She told the truth. She wrote it down. She made sure there was evidence of what had happened to her. And in the end, none of it was enough to save her. But her story can still make a difference. If it makes even one person pay attention to the warning signs, if it makes even one person believe a victim instead of questioning them, then maybe something good can come from all this pain. Maybe it can be a reminder that when someone speaks up, the worst thing we can do is ignore them. Maybe it can be the reason someone out there is given the protection that Bernadette never got. If you found this case as disturbing and heartbreaking as we did, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. True crime is more than just the details of a case, it's about the lessons we take from them, the ways we make sure history doesn't keep repeating itself. And if you think this case couldn't get any more unsettling, wait until you hear about the next one we're covering. A case where the truth was buried under layers of deception, where the most trusted people were hiding the darkest secrets, and where justice came far too late. Thank you for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could have been done differently? What needs to change so that victims like Bernadette don't end up as another name in a long list of tragedies? Your voice matters, and your awareness could be the reason someone out there gets the help they need. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next one.